What's up, guys? Josh Lau here with TheCardGuyz, and today, the final impact of video for Super Slam. Today, we're going to be talking about the impact of Authority of Ataya. Not sure if I pronounced that right, but it is what it is. So, Authority of Ataya is a blue pitch, fabled generic resource gem that's legendary. It says, when this is pitched, defense reaction cards cost opponents an additional 1 resource to play this turn. All right, so this is the fabled of the set. Let's break it down. So this is a staple for several decks. Now this has particular synergy with attack reaction based decks, such as Warrior and Assassin, although certain Warriors we're going to discuss in a little bit may not synergize the best with this. Certain Assassins also like to play more Cheerios, like Slippy does, so it may not be pitching too often, but on paper, those are the attack reaction based decks, and this synergizes best with those. Also, there are several Go Tall decks in the game, and one of the good things about this card is that it reduces the max block value of your opponent, and it also gives you some breathing room, which is very important for decks like Ranger. Offense is the best defense for them. So it synergizes well with these 4 classes. There are also certain decks that might be able to utilize this very nicely if they like to pitch and they come in for certain breakpoints. This also has some particular synergy with them as well. Speaking of synergy, if your deck can shuffle, so there are lots of tutor cards in the game, you could potentially get to see this twice in a medium length game based on how you shuffle, which would be pretty powerful. Also, if you're a deck that can go to second cycle and set up a pitch stack, there's potential for a very for you to basically pitch stack this with several other cards to go for a very, very large play at turn 16, 17, 18, something like that. Also, if you play Command and Conquer, this will also have some bonus synergy as well, because your opponent will look at the attack that's coming at them, and the effect of Authority of Ataya is active, and they're like, all right, fine, I'll just arsenal this D-React instead of playing it this turn, so that makes a follow-up CNC the turn after much stronger. In terms of anti-synergy, if your deck doesn't want to pitch, well, then it's kind of awkward to get this into the pitch zone to get the effect, obviously. And if your deck does not have a clean or easy available resource outlet, that will also be an issue as well. I mentioned the breakpoint based decks will enjoy this. Decks kind of like, Aurora didn't really pitch very much, but she would have been a prime candidate for that. If a deck like Dio can figure out a way to, not see this on the top of the deck, it could also be quite good for her, because, D-Reacts counter that breakpoint style deck quite well. But this card is not a main deck card, even though it is a potential staple. Now, you might be like, Josh, how can a card be a staple but not a main deck card? Well, I'll give you an example. Sink Below is a pretty ubiquitous card. It is considered a staple of the game, but you don't play that in every single matchup. Same with this card. Having a single non-blocking card can get you in trouble in certain matchups. And there are certain matchups where this is not going to be as effective, so you might as well just, bring in something else. Maybe you want to run a clean 60 and this is not part of it. But this is still a very, very strong card. So let's discuss a little bit more on the history of this effect. So there is one other card in the game that has this type of effect, and it is a oldie but a goodie, good old Dauntless from Crucible of War. This came out in the 3rd set of the game, and this is the only other modifying card in the game for defense reactions. And of note, Dauntless only applied to the first attack react or defense reaction, whereas Authority of Ataya lasts the whole turn. So basically, when you utilize Dauntless, you had to be very sure it was going to be very effective. Now, the most classic example back in the day, you had Dorinthia versus the original Dash IE, and this was an extremely effective card against Dash IE because they didn't run Tunic, and they ran a lot of defense reactions, and they were trying to set up a board state and trying to chip you down with, you know, the pistol and the chambers and stuff like that. And this was a very, very back-breaking card. And similarly, Authority of Ataya is also going to need to be used in very particular matchups. You're going to need to understand, is your opponent going to bring in D-reacts against you? What is the likely board configuration of their deck? What is their game plan? And how to best utilize the turns so that you have this effect on. All right. I'm a Warrior player. I'm going to break down this Fabled for the Warriors. So first up, we got Dorinthia. I think this is a staple card for the deck going forward. This card is extremely effective with Dorinthia, obviously. First of all, being able to reduce the max block from hand is extremely important. So what do I mean by that? So let's say you have a sink below and a 3 block. It doesn't really matter the pitch. So normally you could just block for 7. Now, with this ability active, you can either block 3 or you can block for 4 by pitching a card. So either way, you've reduced the potential block value by 3 or 4 in that case. And basically, when you're going when you're keeping a large hand as Dorinthia, being able to reduce the max block value of your opponent is extremely important because that just means you're more likely to hit. Also, that encourages earlier armor usage, which makes certain plays available to you, and they're more likely to give you reprise later because they just don't have the armor to buffer things. This also allows, like I mentioned earlier, that they're more likely to set the D-react into arsenal if they have one, which means if you follow up with an emboldened blade, you get to blow that up, and it feels really, really good. You also will probably get a little bit of a tell in real life when you're playing this card that there's some annoyance that that the effect is active. So you're more likely to set up a good emboldened blade. Also, Dorinthia has the ability to shuffle her deck with Singing Steel Blade, so you could see this potentially several times in the game. And if you're playing against a very defensive style deck, you can take your opponent to second cycle, and then you're guaranteed to see this effect during at least maybe 2 or 3 turns during the game in a 20-turn game, which is a pretty good hit rate and likely to trip up your opponent. This card going to be very, very impactful and a staple. Unfortunately, a fabled staple. I mean, we've seen a trend for this. We've seen, riches of Tropal, whatever, from the last set going to go into, several decks. It is what it is. I don't think this is quite as powerful as the other Fable, but this is still going to be a very, very, very good card for certain decks. All right, let's move on to Boltyn. So Boltyn, I don't think this will be a staple for Boltyn. It is not a yellow card. It is not a light card, so that already makes me kind of question things a little bit. Also, the current meta build for Boltyn is a Cheerio-style deck that does not like to pitch at all, because if you pitch a card and you charge a card, what are you doing with your turn? You better be playing like triple Valiant Thrust or something like that. You really don't want to pitch much in the main meta decks. However, there are some potential off meta decks for Boltyn that could utilize this card. Any dual wield style deck probably would be okay with this. Any 1-cost style that likes to pitch for things like Prayer of Bellana, Take Flight, Valiant Thrust, via the Vanguard into Valiant Thrust, stuff like that, possible. Also, there are some meme builds with Banana Blade. Maybe this finds some place there. But overall, this card just not being yellow, light, and not blocking already makes me kind of go, I don't know about that. Moving on, we have Kasai. This is probably a staple for Kasai because this helps with gold generation but when you use your hero ability. This helps with copper generation on Outland Skirmish and Spoils of War. And this helps with sellsword generation, which is a thing now because of Blood Follows Blade. So basically, you're more likely to hit because your opponent is less likely to... They either have to let it hit or they have to take a very inefficient line. And Kasai is one of those decks that can capitalize on inefficiency very well because she can She could flexibly play offense or defense. And if you're being inefficient, that means the game is going longer, which is generally good for Kasai. Now, I would say that this card is better in the aggressive lists because those are the lists that do not care so much about having a no block. And these are the lists that are trying to actively play a blot on our hands as quickly as possible. So this basically will help get those lists to the desired board state faster, where you have several gold tokens, you have several copper tokens, you still have your armor, you got your cell swords in play, and you are on life parity, and then you get to go for a very, very big value turn. So those are quite important. Those value turns are very, very important against the aggressive decks, whether you're playing the aggressive list or the passive or the more defensive list. So yeah. Now, of note, current Kasai lists do not shuffle, so that is a general. I'd say that's a downside because you're not going to get to see this twice. However, you could set up a nice second cycle pitch deck. You do have to be a little bit wary of pitching this and then seeing or pitching this near the other no block, which is riches. So you could possibly draw a hand that only has like 6 block, which could get you into some trouble. But I think that's something that that is not likely to happen too often. So I think this is probably a staple card for Kasai. Moving on to Olympia. So Olympia, so there are 2 styles of Olympia. You got the DGA version and you got the dual wield version. Obviously, the DGA version wants all their cards to block and does not care if the opponent is playing D-Reacts on their DGA, because that is exactly what they want them to do, because that means you're walking straight into the fatigue Olympia style. But the dual wield style is the little bit more proactive version, and that is a style of deck that tries to win wagers. So this definitely will help with winning wagers because your opponent cannot as effectively block because of the penalty for paying for D-Reacts. Also, this makes the 3 for 7s particularly better because that forces them to use their armor, or it forces them to take a very inefficient line where they basically are using 3 cards to block for 7. Now, Olympia does have one of the best, or I don't know if it's the best, but he has a very reliable resource outlet with his gold tokens, so he will be able to utilize any tempo that is gained from the effect of Authority of Ataya. Right, finally, we got Fang. Fang, this is a possible staple so in general, Fang blues need to be good pre-3 fealty and post-3 fealty. So cards that block well, have go again, have the ability to, like if you make them draconic, to give a little buff and give go again. These are all things that mark. These are all effects that are very, very important in Fang. So this card can only be pitched. It cannot be like put into sold. It can't be, you can't just play it like glint. You can't mark them like tip off. So you basically have to pitch into this, and Fang does not have a super reliable way to pitch into things. I mean, you got grains, you got bracers, but those stipulate you have to hit. So there's potential for this card to get kind of locked in your hand, which is not too good. But you sink below, fate foreseen, these type of effects could help. However, the Dauntless effect is actually very powerful in Fang, and it's one of those effects that is just really, really strong because the opponent oftentimes tries to slow down Fang before he gets 3 fealty. They try to slow him down. The first cycle is when everybody has the maximum density of D-Reacts in their deck. And basically being able to trip up your opponent a little bit, make their plays inefficient, means you're more likely to be able to keep a 3, 4, or 5 card hand as Fang, which means you're more likely to get your fealty tokens. So there's a lot of kind of indirect synergy with this effect, plus being able to get to 3 fealty against a wide variety of decks, especially the Earth Heroes. This is extremely effective against the Earth Heroes. Now, we've seen a slight trend in Fang decks recently towards more 1 and 2 cost cards. cards like Endear Devotion, Hunt the Hunter, For the Realm. These are all cards that have sort of snuck back into the metagame. And hey, if we got to pay for these cards, we might as well get an extra bonus effect as well by pitching the Authority of Ataya. So possible staple in Fang, definitely something to try out and kind of see if it works for you. Kind of depends on your build, but I think this effect is strong enough to merit at least some testing. All right, let's kind of wrap things up here. So basically, the key takeaway here is that this is a strong staple sideboard card for several decks, because there are many decks in the game that either gain a ton of value from having the D-React at the right time, or they are purposely trying to slow the game down against you. And this card helps to counter both of those styles. This is not a main deck card. This is a card that demands that you know your matchups very well, when to bring it in, when not to bring it in, and whether or not to even put it in your deck at all in your 80. These are all considerations that need to be carefully thought about. This is a powerful effect in certain matchups. I mentioned the Earth Heroes. There are other matchups where the difference between 0 and 1 is massive, because they oftentimes are trying to play a very, very efficient hand. They might have to stick that card, the D-React, into the arsenal. It just creates a little bit of inefficiency, kind of reminds me of the Intimidate mechanic a little bit. Where it kind of makes your opponent have, it's not direct disruption, but it does make things a little bit annoying for your opponent. You can also set up a very intricate second cycle pitch stack, depending on your hero, and it'd be quite beautiful to see those executed. All right, anyways, is this Fable going to be strong? I think so. Is it going to be expensive? Probably. So yeah, if you're playing if you're playing Assassin, Warrior, Guardian, Ranger, I would probably pick one up, especially if you're a more competitive player. This will likely see some usage in certain decks, and there are potential metagames where this card would start seeing even more play. If there's a very, very defensive style deck, I could see this card, starting to become, really, really in demand. All right, well, I guess this wraps things up here. Hope you guys have enjoyed this little series of impact of videos. All right, this has been Josh Lau, TheCardGuyz. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey man, did you get the KO deck for Worlds? No one's doing that, okay?
You're to play whole horse now. Don't kill him. You're getting greedy. You're doing it too. All right. What's up, guys? Put him in the middle for now. I like it. That's perfect. All right, next year.
RTN champion, Robert.
Yeah, we're gonna have to order a couple more.
Thanks for watching the video.
Here's some more Card Guys videos you might enjoy.